I returned home from my trip. My key wouldn't fit in the lock. I called my son Ryan. "What's going on?" He said, "Mom, this is for your own good. We sold the house." Diane agreed. "You'll be better off this way, Walter." I smiled and sat on the front steps. Then I sent a message to my lawyer. They fell for the trap, file everything. The key slid in just fine. It always had. 38 years, same lock, same key, same satisfying little click that meant home. Except this time there was no click. There was nothing. Just a key sitting in a lock like it had never met the thing before in its life. I stood there on my front porch in Lansing, Michigan, on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, suitcase beside me, the smell of someone's fireplace in the air, a gas station sandwich digesting somewhere in my lower abdomen. I had been gone 11 days. Fishing trip up near Traverse City with my old friend Gerald, who snores like a diesel engine and still insists he doesn't snore. We've been doing this trip every fall for nearly 20 years. I come back smelling like lake water and regret over the ones that got away. It's a tradition. I tried the key again, wiggled it, coaxed it, gave it the same gentle persuasion I used to give the copier at work when it jammed, which was a lot because the firm bought cheap equipment and then acted surprised when nothing worked. Still nothing. I stepped back and looked at the door. Same door I'd hung myself in 1987. Same brass handle I'd replaced the summer Patricia passed. 3 years ago now. Different lock, though. Shiny. New. The kind of new that doesn't happen by accident. I pulled out my phone and called my son. Lucas picked up on the second ring. "Dad," he said, "you're back early." "I'm standing on my porch, Lucas. My key doesn't work." There was a pause. Not a long one. Just long enough to be a paragraph. "Dad, we need to talk. Are you okay to drive? Can you come over?" "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Whose lock is on my door?" Another pause. Then Claudia's voice in the background, low and urgent, the way people talk when they're trying to have a private conversation inside a phone call that is not private. "Just stay there, Dad. We'll come to you." They arrived 22 minutes later. I know this because I sat on the porch steps, put my hands in my lap, and watched the clock on my phone like a man with nothing better to do, which, technically, I was, since I had just been locked out of my own house. I did not call a locksmith. I did not call the police. I sat in the cold October air with my suitcase next to me and I waited, because I already knew. I had known for 6 weeks. I had been waiting for this exact moment the way you wait for a dentist appointment, with full knowledge that something unpleasant is coming and a grim satisfaction that at least you were right about it. What I had not expected was how calm I would feel. Turns out decades of structural engineering will do that to a person. When you spend 31 years calculating load-bearing capacity and stress tolerances, you develop a certain relationship with problems. You look at them, you measure them, you figure out what will hold and what will collapse, and then you plan accordingly. My name is Walter Ferreira. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for a firm in Lansing that no longer exists, which I find darkly poetic. I retired at 62 and have lived in the same house on Hartwell Drive for 38 years. It is not a mansion. It is a 4-bedroom brick house on a corner lot with a double garage and a workshop out back where I spend most of my time building furniture. Tables. Chairs. Bookshelves. A rocking chair once, though the proportions were slightly off and it rocked a little aggressively, like it had an opinion. Patricia and I bought the house in 1986 for $87,000. When she passed 3 years ago, I had it appraised. The number came back at just under $650,000. That surprised me. It shouldn't have. That's what houses in Michigan do when you're not paying attention. But it was the first time I thought of my home as a number rather than a place, and I didn't like the feeling. It felt like looking at a photograph of someone you love and seeing an asset. I have one son. Lucas is 41. He lives about 15 minutes from me with his wife Claudia and their 2 kids, Theo and Nina, who are 8 and 6 and genuinely delightful in that way children are before they become old enough to disappoint you. For most of his life, Lucas was a decent son. Not a particularly attentive one, but decent. He called on birthdays, showed up at Christmas, helped me move some lumber once, though he complained about his back for approximately 3 weeks afterward. When Patricia passed, he started coming around more. I thought it was grief. I thought he was checking in, being a son the way sons sometimes finally become sons when it's almost too late. I was genuinely touched. Looking back, I think he was doing a walkthrough. It started small. It always starts small. That's the thing nobody tells you about being slowly managed out of your own life. It begins with casseroles and concern, and ends with a new lock on your front door. Dad, are you eating properly? You've lost some weight. I had not lost weight. I had, if anything, gained weight. Because Gerald's wife sends us with an embarrassing quantity of baked goods every year, and I have very little willpower when it comes to zucchini bread. Dad, this house is a lot for one person. Have you thought about whether it still makes sense? Dad, Claudia's mother moved into a place in Columbus last year. She loves it. Activities every day. You might actually enjoy it. Dad, I'm just saying, you could take the equity out of this house and live very comfortably for the rest of your life. I told him I wasn't interested. I told him this house was where I'd raised him, where Patricia had her garden, where I had my workshop. I told him I was 65 years old and perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Thank you very much. He nodded. He backed off. And then, 2 months later, he started again. The pattern repeated 4 or 5 times over the course of a year. Each time I said no. Each time Lucas waited a respectable interval, like a salesman who'd read a book about not being too pushy, and came back with a slightly different angle. Once he brought Claudia with him, which I now understand was a tactical decision. She's warmer than Lucas, easier to talk to, and she makes very good coffee, which I suspect was also not an accident. You don't show up to a negotiation without your best assets. Once he arrived with printed brochures from 3 different retirement communities, fanned out on my kitchen table like a real estate agent presenting vacation packages. One of them had a putting green. I don't golf. I have never golfed. Lucas knows this. The brochure remained on the table long enough to become a coaster. Once, and this is the one that was meant to land hardest, he started talking about what would happen if I fell in the workshop and nobody found me for days. Dad, you're out there alone. Nobody knows you're in there. What if something happened? He said it with the face people make when they're genuinely concerned, which is almost identical to the face people make when they want you to think they're genuinely concerned. I've spent enough years in engineering meetings to know the difference. Usually. The problem was, 2 weeks before that conversation, I had actually fallen in the workshop. I was moving a piece of hardwood off the top shelf of the lumber rack, misjudged the weight by what I can only describe as a catastrophic margin, and went down hard on my left side. Bruised ribs, bruised ego. I was on the concrete floor for about 20 minutes before I could get myself back up, which is a long time to lie on concrete thinking about your life choices. I did not tell anyone. I lay there, stared at the ceiling, had a brief but surprisingly productive conversation with myself about mortality and stubbornness, and then got up and finished the shelf. So when Lucas mentioned the falling scenario, my first thought was, how does he know? He didn't, of course. It was a general concern, not a specific one. Pure coincidence. But coincidences have a way of shaking you loose from assumptions, and I started paying closer attention to things I'd been half noticing for months, like the fact that Lucas had asked me, quite casually, to add him to my bank account. Just for emergencies, Dad, in case something happens and I need to handle things quickly. I'd done it without much thought. He'd helped me with some online transfers after Patricia passed, and it seemed practical. Efficient. The kind of thing a helpful son does. Like the fact that Claudia had asked, equally casually, where I kept my important documents. My will, my property deed, my insurance papers. I had shown her the filing cabinet in the 2nd bedroom and, because I am apparently a very trusting man, given her a key to the house a year earlier so she could water the plants while I was away. The plants, I should mention, are 3. A fern that has been dying slowly for 6 years and refuses to commit to it, a succulent that requires almost nothing and still sometimes looks resentful, and a small jade plant Patricia bought at a farmer's market in 2014 that I would genuinely be devastated to lose. Claudia knew this. She watered them faithfully. I thought she was being kind, like the fact that Lucas had mentioned twice, on separate occasions, months apart, that he knew a real estate agent. a friend of a friend who specialized in estate transitions and had helped a lot of families in similar situations. None of it seemed alarming on its own. People add family members to accounts. People ask where documents are kept. People know real estate agents. These are normal human activities that happen constantly without anyone ending up on their porch with a key that doesn't work. Together, though, looking back, they told a very clear story. The kind of story where you finish reading it and think, I should have seen that coming from chapter 2. The thing that finally opened my eyes happened on a Thursday evening in late August. I was at my kitchen table going through my mail, physical mail, the old-fashioned kind, because I have never fully trusted paperless billing and I stand by that position, when I found an envelope from a law office in Chicago I had never heard of. Inside was a single page. It was a summary of a power of attorney document. My name was on it. Lucas's name was on it as the designated attorney. The effective date was listed as 2 weeks prior. I had not signed any power of attorney. I sat at that table for a long time. I read the page 4 times. I turned it over, as if there might be a reasonable explanation on the back. There was not. I got up, made a pot of coffee, decaf, because it was 8 in the evening and I'm 67, not reckless, sat back down and read it again. Then I called my lawyer. Her name is Martha Nakamura. She's been my lawyer for 20 years. She handled Patricia's estate, drafted my will, and dealt with a property dispute with my neighbor Dennis back in 2013 that got surprisingly heated for something that was technically about a fence. She is sharp, direct, and has never once told me what I wanted to hear when what I needed to hear was different. I value this more than I can say. I called her at home, which I had never done before. She picked up because she recognized my number. I read her the letter. There was a pause. Then Martha said, in the tone of a person who has seen things, Walter, don't touch anything in that house. Don't move those documents. Don't say a word to Lucas yet. Come see me first thing tomorrow morning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, in the bed I'd shared with Patricia for 35 years, and I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about my son. I thought about the boy I'd coached in Little League, who struck out more often than not and cried about it only once, which I had respected. The teenager I'd driven to college in Ann Arbor with a minivan full of things he didn't need. The young man I'd danced with at his wedding while Claudia's aunt played something on a keyboard that was meant to be a love song and was aggressively not. I thought about what it means to love someone and be betrayed by them. By morning, I had decided there was no other explanation. And I had decided something else too. I was not going to panic. I was not going to confront anyone. I was not going to do anything at all until Martha told me I could. I was going to be a structural engineer about this. I was going to find out exactly what was load-bearing and what was about to collapse. Martha confirmed what I already suspected, which is the most expensive kind of confirmation there is. The power of attorney had been filed with forged documentation. Whoever had prepared it, and Martha had a strong suspicion it was the friend of a friend real estate lawyer Lucas had mentioned twice with the casualness of someone who has rehearsed mentioning something casually, had used a copy of my signature, likely lifted from a document I had signed years earlier, a closing paper, a notarized form, something that had passed through enough hands to make the lifting easy and the tracing difficult. Martha told me this was more common than people realized, particularly with older homeowners, particularly after the death of a spouse, when one partner suddenly becomes the sole owner of a valuable property, and the paperwork of grief leaves signatures scattered in places you don't remember. Then she told me the thing that made my stomach drop straight through the floor and into the basement, which, structurally speaking, should not have been possible given the foundation work I'd done in 2009. A conditional agreement of purchase and sale had been filed on my house 3 weeks earlier. The closing date was set for mid-November. The sale price was $620,000, about $30,000 below market value, which Martha said was typical in these situations. Fast sale. Cooperative buyer, everyone looking the other way and splitting the difference. My son had sold my house. I was still living in it. I sat in Martha's office on a Friday morning with a cup of her assistant's terrible coffee, and I want to be clear, it was genuinely bad, the kind of coffee that makes you wonder if the machine has a grudge, and I listened to her lay out my options. I could go to the police immediately. I could confront Lucas. I could file an injunction to halt the sale. All of those were on the table, she said, pushing a legal pad toward me with 3 columns labeled exactly that, because Martha is the kind of person who uses legal pads unironically, and I find it deeply reassuring. But then she said something else. Walter, if you move too fast, Lucas's lawyer, and he will have one, will claim the POA is legitimate and tie this up for a year. Courts are slow. Paperwork is patient. If you give me 6 weeks, I can build something he cannot argue his way out of. 6 weeks. I drove home, went into the workshop, picked up a piece of sandpaper, and stood there holding it for about 4 minutes without doing anything. Then I put it down, went inside, made lunch, and started the longest performance of my life. The following Sunday, I had dinner at Lucas and Claudia's house. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, a green bean casserole that Theo had allegedly helped make, which explained its texture. I sat at their kitchen table and I ate, and I asked Lucas about work, and I let Claudia refill my water, and I helped Nina with a drawing she was doing of a horse that looked more like a dog, which I told her was an excellent horse because I am not a monster. And when Lucas said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied air of a man who thinks he is about to close a deal, Dad, I've been thinking, with winter coming, maybe we should talk again about your living situation. I looked up from my pot roast and said, you know what, Lucas? Maybe you're right. Let's talk soon. He blinked. He looked at Claudia. Claudia looked at him. Then he smiled. And that smile, that specific smile, was the moment I understood everything completely. Because it was not the smile of a son relieved that his stubborn father was finally coming around. It was not warm. It was not tender. It was the smile of someone who has been waiting for a number to come up and just watched it land. I recognized it because I had seen it once before, years ago, when Lucas was 12 and had been angling for a new bicycle for 3 months, and finally wore Patricia down. Same smile, different stakes. I drove home and called Martha from my driveway. He took the bait, I said. Good, she said. Don't give him anything else. Just keep being agreeable and boring. Agreeable and boring. 31 years of engineering meetings had prepared me for exactly this. While I was attending Sunday dinners and pretending to warm to the idea of a retirement community with a putting green I would never use, Martha was working. She obtained a court order to freeze any transactions related to my property. She filed a formal complaint with the Illinois State Bar regarding the lawyer who had filed the fraudulent POA. She gathered phone records, obtained legally through civil process, showing multiple calls between Lucas, the buyer's agent, and that Chicago law office going back nearly 8 months. 8 months. Lucas had been planning this for 8 months. I had been to his house for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Theo's birthday party, and a 4th of July barbecue during those 8 months. I had brought a pie to one of those events, a blueberry pie from the Good Bakery on Fulton Street. I want that noted somewhere in the official record. Martha also helped me establish a legitimate ironclad living trust, with my property and assets placed inside it, and Martha herself named as trustee with specific instructions that would make any future attempt at this particular maneuver about as effective as trying to sell a building someone else already owns in 3 different jurisdictions. I also did one thing on my own. I installed a small camera in the workshop, the kind that connects to your phone and stores footage in the cloud, which my nephew had set up for me the previous Christmas, and which I had assumed I would never actually use for anything more dramatic than checking whether I'd left the light on. I told Martha about it. She said it was fine. It was my property. Document everything. What that camera captured over the following 5 weeks was Lucas entering my workshop twice without mentioning it to me. The first time, he spent about 15 minutes going through my filing boxes, the ones where I keep older documents, appliance warranties, a manual for a drill press I no longer own. The second time, he brought someone with him. A man I didn't recognize, younger, wearing the kind of jacket that says I work in real estate the same way a stethoscope says I work in medicine. They walked through the workshop, the garage, the backyard. The man took photographs on his phone with the professional enthusiasm of someone being paid per square foot. I watched this footage sitting in my truck in a Walmart parking lot on Saginaw Highway, so that if Lucas happened to drive by, he would see an empty driveway and think nothing of it. He thought nothing of it. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was underestimating how much a retired structural engineer enjoys building something designed specifically not to fall down. The fishing trip was not entirely a fishing trip. I mean, it was. Gerald and I drove up to Traverse City, rented the same cabin we always rent from a man named Doug, who charges too much and apologizes about it every year like that makes it better, and spent 11 days doing what two men in their late 60s do when left unsupervised near a lake. We fished. We ate badly. We argued about whether a particular lure Gerald has been using since 1987 is genuinely effective, or whether the fish that have been caught on it were simply having a bad day and made a poor decision. Gerald maintains it's the lure. I maintain it's chaos theory. But the trip was also, in the way that things can be two things at once, a trap. The week before I left, I made a point of mentioning the trip to Lucas at dinner. I told him I'd be gone 11 days. I mentioned specifically that I was leaving my truck at home and getting a ride to the bus station downtown, which was true. Gerald picks me up because parking downtown is impossible, and the long-term lot near the station smells like something that has given up on itself entirely. I said this once, at the table in front of both Lucas and Claudia, with the careful casualness of a man sharing a detail he considers unimportant. I also called Martha from Traverse City on the third day and told her the timeline. She told me she was ready. On the 9th day, Martha's assistant sent me a message. 3 words. It happened. Come back. The locks had been changed. The buyer's agent had done it without waiting for the actual closing date, apparently deciding that possession was 9/10 of the law and the other 10th was someone else's problem. This was either impatience or arrogance, and in my experience, those two things traveled together so frequently they should just get a joint checking account. Martha had anticipated this. She had filed the injunction the previous afternoon, roughly 18 hours before the lock was changed, which meant that by the time I was standing on my porch with a useless key, the legal equivalent of a very large and extremely immovable object was already sitting directly in front of the sale. I cut the trip short by 2 days. Gerald drove me to the bus station without asking many questions, which is one of the great qualities of a 40-year friendship. He had known something was wrong from the moment I arrived at his truck that first morning, carrying what he later described as the particular silence of a man who has already decided something. Gerald is not a complicated person, but he pays attention. I told him enough. He nodded, handed me a thermos of coffee for the road, and told me to let him know how it went. The bus ride back to Lansing was 4 hours. I sat in a window seat, watched Michigan go by, ate a granola bar I found in my jacket pocket that may have been there since the previous fall, and thought about nothing in particular. Or tried to. The mind does what it wants. I thought about Patricia. I thought about the first winter in that house, 1986, when the furnace quit in January and we slept in the living room in front of the fireplace with every blanket we owned piled on top of us like some kind of fabric emergency. Patricia had laughed about it. She laughed about most things, which I had sometimes found baffling and now find irreplaceable. I thought about Lucas as a kid, genuinely. Not the Lucas of the last 2 years. Not the Lucas with the brochures and the friend of a friend lawyer, but the earlier one. The one who used to come into the workshop on Saturday mornings and sit on an overturned bucket watching me work, not saying much, just being there. I used to give him small tasks. Sand this edge. Hold this piece steady. He was patient about it, which surprised me, because he was not generally a patient child. I wondered when that changed. I wondered if I had missed something, some turn in the road where a different choice might have led somewhere else. I didn't arrive at an answer. I don't think there is one. People make the choices they make for reasons that are partly circumstance and partly character, and you cannot sand down the character parts. I got home at 2:17 in the afternoon. I stood on the porch, tried the key, confirmed what I already knew, sat down on the steps, and waited. Lucas and Claudia pulled up 22 minutes later in Lucas's car. They got out together, which told me they had discussed this on the way over, which told me they had a plan, which told me the plan was about to be significantly less useful than they imagined. Lucas walked up the path with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was already talking before he reached the porch steps. Dad, listen. I know it seems sudden, but this is for your own good. This is what Claudia and I have been worried about for a long time. The house is too much for one person. The workshop is a liability. We found you a really great place in East Lansing. Dad, it's beautiful. There's a... Lucas, I said. He stopped. I had not raised my voice. I had not stood up. I was still sitting on the porch steps with my hands folded in my lap, which I think confused him, because it is difficult to deliver a speech to someone who looks like they are waiting for a bus. Who is the buyer? Something moved across his face. Just for a second. A flicker of the thing underneath the prepared version. Dad, that's not really... Is it someone you know? Claudia touched his arm. He glanced at her. Lucas, I said again, and I kept my voice the same way I kept my hands, very still. I want you to think carefully before you answer me. I want you to think about whether you want to have this conversation here on the porch, or whether you'd prefer to have it in front of a judge. The silence that followed was the longest I have experienced since the 20 minutes I spent on the workshop floor. Longer than the drive to the hospital the morning Patricia had her first episode. The kind of silence that contains everything that is about to change, sitting very quietly inside it, waiting to come out. Claudia's hand was still on Lucas's arm. Her eyes were bright, not angry, something else. Lucas looked at the ground. He looked, in that moment, less like a 41-year-old man who had spent 8 months orchestrating a real estate fraud, and more like a 12-year-old boy sitting on these exact same steps, waiting for his father to come outside and decide what happened next. The difference was that last time, I had sat down next to him. I was not going to do that now. I want to be precise about what happened next, because precision matters, and because I spent 31 years writing engineering reports and old habits die hard. Lucas did not confess dramatically. There was no moment where he grabbed my hand and said, Father, I have wronged you, while a single tear rolled cinematically down his cheek. This is not that kind of story, and Lucas is not that kind of person. What he did was deflate. Slowly, visibly, like a tire with a nail in it that hasn't fully committed to the situation yet. He sat down on the porch steps, not next to me. One step below me, which I noted, and which I suspect meant something, though I am an engineer and not a therapist, so I will leave the interpretation to someone more qualified. Dad, he said very quietly, we were going to tell you, after the closing. We had it all arranged, a place in East Lansing, 2 bedrooms, nice complex, near a park. We were going to set everything up before we told you, so you wouldn't have to worry about any of it. I looked at him. You were going to tell me, I said, after you had sold my house and moved my belongings into a place I had not chosen, with money that was mine. He didn't answer. Lucas, the house your mother and I bought together, the house you grew up in, the house that still has the pencil marks on the kitchen door frame where we measured your height every birthday until you told us you were too old for it, which you said at 9, which was optimistic. Claudia made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and landed somewhere in the complicated territory between them. She was sitting next to Lucas now, her hands in her lap, her eyes red. I want to say something about Claudia here, because she deserves a more careful accounting than simply the wife who went along with it. I don't know how much she initiated and how much she followed. I don't know whether she raised concerns that were overruled, or whether she was the one who found the Chicago lawyer, or whether she simply made the pot roast and told herself everything would work out fine. I don't know, and I have decided that I don't need to know, because the not knowing is the most honest position available to me, and I have always preferred honest positions, even uncomfortable ones. What I do know is that she watered the jade plant faithfully for a year, and that she once drove Patricia to a doctor's appointment without being asked when I was stuck in a meeting, and that she is a better person than her worst decision, which is something I believe about most people and choose to extend to her now, in the interest of sleeping at night. Dad, Lucas said, still looking at the porch steps, I thought, you're alone. The workshop, the stairs, the furnace, all of it. What if something happened? What if I fell? I said. He looked up. I did fall, I said. 8 months ago, in the workshop. I was alone. I was on the floor for 20 minutes. Something moved across his face, something that looked, briefly, like genuine concern, which I found both touching and annoying in equal measure. I got up, I said, and I finished the shelf. I let that sit for a moment. Lucas, I am 67 years old. I am not 97. I am not confused. I am not a liability to be managed. I am a man who built furniture and raised a son and buried a wife, and is still, as of this particular Tuesday afternoon, entirely capable of determining where he lives and what happens to his property. The fact that it is inconvenient for you that I am capable does not make me less so. Claudia was crying steadily now. Lucas was looking at the ground again. Martha has filed everything, I said. The fraudulent POA, the unauthorized sale agreement, the evidence of unauthorized entry into this property, the phone records showing 8 months of communication between you, the buyer's agent, and the law office in Chicago. The sale has been legally halted. The buyer has been notified. There will be a full investigation. Depending on what it finds, there may be criminal charges. I said this the way I would deliver a structural assessment, not with anger. Not with the satisfaction of a man who has been waiting to say something. Just as information, clearly stated, the way things that are true should be stated. Lucas put his face in his hands, not dramatically. He just put his face in his hands and sat there, which was somehow worse than anything dramatic would have been. Dramatic I could have held at a distance. This I could not. I looked at my son sitting on the porch steps of the house where I had watched him learn to ride a bicycle, where I had stayed up past midnight waiting for him to come home from things I pretended not to know were parties, where I had sat next to him after his dog died when he was 11 and hadn't said anything at all because there was nothing useful to say. I looked at him and I felt something that I have not found the right word for yet, and I have been looking for 3 years. It is not anger. Anger, I know. It burns in a specific place and you can track it. This was something heavier and colder and more permanent. The feeling of a load-bearing wall that has been quietly compromised for a long time finally making itself known. I want you to go home, I said. I want you to call a lawyer, a real one, not whoever helped you with this. And I want you to understand that what happens next is a consequence of a choice you made, not something that was done to you. They stood up. Claudia looked at me for a moment. Her mouth opened and then closed. There were about 6 things she wanted to say, and she chose none of them, which I think was the right decision under the circumstances. They walked back to the car. Lucas didn't turn around. The car pulled away. I sat on the porch steps in the October air in front of my house with my suitcase next to me, and I called Martha. She picked up on the first ring. They were here, I said. How do you feel? She said. I thought about it. Like I need a cup of tea, I said, and approximately 3 days of not talking to anyone. Get inside first, she said. I'll send a locksmith within the hour. Martha? I said. Yes. Thank you. A pause. The comfortable kind. Get inside, Walter. It's cold. She was right. It was cold, but I sat there for another few minutes anyway because it was my porch, and I had earned the right to sit on it for as long as I wanted. The investigation took 4 months. I will spare you the procedural details, partly because they are genuinely tedious, and partly because Martha explained most of them to me in a conference room over several cups of coffee that were significantly better than her assistant's. And even then, I understood roughly 60% of what was happening at any given moment. Law, it turns out, operates on a timeline that makes geological processes look impulsive. What I can tell you is this. The fraudulent POA was traced back to the Chicago law firm, which was found to have prepared similar documents for 3 other families in the previous 2 years. All elderly homeowners, all recently widowed, all in possession of properties that had quietly become worth a great deal more than they'd paid for them. The lawyer involved surrendered his license, which Martha described as the minimum acceptable outcome in the tone of a woman who had wanted more and was making peace with what she got. The buyer, a real estate investor from Indianapolis whom I had never met and who had apparently decided that basic due diligence was optional, cooperated with the investigation in exchange for immunity. He provided testimony confirming that Lucas had initiated the arrangement, that Lucas had made the first call, that Lucas had found the lawyer, identified the buyer, and structured the timeline around my fishing trip with the precision of a man who had thought about it for a long time. 8 months, it turned out, was conservative. Martha believed it had been closer to 14. Lucas was charged with fraud over $5,000 and breach of trust. He took a plea agreement. He did not go to prison. The court accepted a conditional sentence. 2 years of community service, financial restitution, and a permanent prohibition from acting as a power of attorney or estate trustee in the state of Michigan, which I found appropriate in the way that a lock on a door is appropriate after someone has already tried to walk through it uninvited. It was not the outcome I would have written. In the version I would have written, there would have been more accountability and fewer legal technicalities, and possibly a scene where someone had to publicly apologize in a room with good acoustics. But the law is not a story. It is a process, and processes produce what they produce, and you make your peace with it, or you spend the rest of your life rehearsing the ending you didn't get. I made my peace with it. Mostly. My house is still mine. The living trust Martha established means it will remain mine for as long as I choose to live here, wrapped in enough legal protection that attempting to circumvent it would require more ambition than most people can sustain. When I am gone, it passes to a land conservation organization that protects wetland habitat in northern Michigan. That was Patricia's idea. Originally, something she mentioned once on a drive up to Traverse City, the kind of thing people say and rarely follow through on. I followed through on it. It felt like the correct use of the house she loved. I do not have a relationship with Lucas right now. I want to be precise about that right now, because I am not a man who closes doors permanently if I can help it. Doors have hinges for a reason, but a door can be closed for a long time without being permanently closed, and this one is closed for a long time. His children still send me drawings. Theo favors dinosaurs. Nina draws horses that have improved significantly since the kitchen table incident, and now look, if not exactly like horses, then at least like animals that have made a decision about what they want to be. The drawings arrive slipped through the mail slot, which I believe Claudia arranges, because she is a better person than her worst chapter, and she knows I would not want to lose the grandchildren in the wreckage of everything else. I keep the drawings on the workbench in the workshop. I look at them sometimes when I'm sanding. Last week I finished a blanket chest, white ash, which I have had drying in the workshop for 4 years, waiting for the right project the way good wood waits, patiently, without complaint. Dovetail joints, hand cut. The proportions are correct. The lid sits level. The hinges are solid. It does not rock aggressively like the chair of 2019, which I have chosen to remember as a learning experience. Patricia would have liked it. She would have immediately put things in it, which is the highest compliment a piece of furniture can receive. I have been asked, by people who heard about this situation through the particular grapevine that exists in a city like Lansing, where everyone eventually knows everyone's retired neighbor's business, whether I feel angry, whether I feel sad, whether I feel betrayed. The honest answer is yes, all three, and also a fourth thing I still don't have a word for, which sits in the same place that Lucas used to sit when he was on that bucket in the workshop watching me work on Saturday mornings. That place is not empty. It is occupied by something complicated. I have decided to leave it complicated rather than resolve it into something simpler than it actually is. What I want to say to anyone who is reading this and recognizes pieces of their own situation in it is the following. Your home is not a problem to be managed by people who stand to benefit from the solution. Your age is not a diagnosis. Your desire to remain in a place that holds your life, your memories, your workshop, your wife's jade plant that has been dying slowly for 6 years and refuses to commit to it, that desire is not stubbornness. It is not a burden. It is a right. If you are over 60 and you own property and the people around you have started having conversations about your living situation, ask yourself who benefits from those conversations. Ask yourself whether the concern is for you or for what you own. These are not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously. Call a lawyer. Your lawyer, not a family friend, not someone's recommendation, yours. Sign nothing you have not read completely. Add no one to your accounts without understanding exactly what that access means. And if someone files a document with your name on it that you did not sign, that is not a misunderstanding. That is a crime. Treat it accordingly. The furnace is fine, by the way. The stairs don't bother me. Gerald is coming through next month, and I owe him the 2 days of fishing I cut short, which he has reminded me of 3 times via text message because Gerald has recently discovered texting and is deploying it with the enthusiasm of someone who has just found a new tool and wants to use it on everything. I am still in my house on Hartwell Drive in Lansing, Michigan. I am still in my workshop on Saturday mornings. I am still standing. That is enough. That has always been enough.